And I said, okay, well, what's going on? She said, well, I've been taking this medicine, and now, now I need to take it. My wife and I were pregnant, or my wife was pregnant in more specific terms, with our second son, Phoenix. And she was having kind of a lot of debilitating nausea during that pregnancy. And so I said, well, just go to the doctor and see if there's anything that they can give just to take the edge off. And so she went, and they gave her some medicine, and she started taking it. And then a couple months later, hey, that nausea's back, and it's worse. And she went back to the doctor, and they increased the dosage. And I was actually in Austin, Texas for a show when she called me, and she said, hey, I need you to come home. And I was obviously on the road, and I'd never gotten that call before. And so I got on the next plane. I didn't even say goodbye to Joel, the band guy. I went straight, told Dad what was going on, got on a plane, went home, and I think it was that night, I kind of held her through a lot of the shakes and a lot of different things. And the next day we went to a mental health facility, and she had done, they said the best thing for her was to do about 2 weeks of outpatient therapy. And then obviously after that, in therapy for really quite a number of years. I think when you're going through addiction, you're going through difficult, nobody prepares you for those moments. You make these vows in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. They don't mean less just because you're a few years into marriage. They don't mean less. That vow is no longer, it's always just as important the first time you say it as making a commitment to live out those vows 10 years down the road, 30 years down the road, 50, 60, whatever it might be. That vow remains a vow. And I think the grace that we feel and the mistakes that we've made, the person that you love, maybe it's, alcohol, maybe it's drugs, whatever it may be, they still deserve that same amount of grace. And it's a very difficult thing because, and look, for the experts out there, sometimes there are some hard boundary lines, and I think everybody understands that. But the same grace that we feel like we deserve at times needs to be cast on the other people that, to be honest, I think they don't deserve it. And that's when grace becomes real. Because when you don't deserve something and you're treated with gentleness and you're treated with kindness, that's when the gospel becomes real. One of my favorite quotes in the world that some people may take issue with, but I think it's very, very powerful, and that's St. Francis of Assisi says, preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. That means that the gospel is so loud with how you're living that the words are no longer necessary. Now, obviously, we all know that there are times when words are very necessary, but I think when it comes to the addict, I think that quote could not be more applicable, because at the end of the day, probably the words is very fleeting. But when you're picking them up, when you're loving them, when you're doing the hard work, that's what communicates to that soul. That's what communicates to every soul, is when you feel unloved, how are you loved? And we as Christians need to be people that love very, very well.